Hello everyone, my name is Karla and I'm going to share with you my case of study. The present literary comparative analysis seeks to analyze the similarities and differences regarding the influence of religion as demonstrated by the Jungian process of individuation in Matthew Lewis, The Monk, a Romance, and Ana Castillo, So Far From God. Some critical aspects of each author's lives may shed some light on the novel's central theme, a critique to religion on several of their literary features. Matthew Lewis wrote The Monk in a record time of 10 weeks before his 20th birthday, whereas Ana Castillo wrote So Far From God in her 40s. Ana Castillo used the title So Far From God based on a famous Porfirio Diaz phrase, so far from God, so near the United States, that symbolizes the cultural conflict in the Southwest in the United States of America, further designated as the U.S. In the novel So Far From God, Castillo describes the daughter role in society through four women named La Loca, Esperanza, Caridad, and Fe. Sofia depicts the mother and wife roles. So Far From God summarizes the most profound voices in the Chicana culture during 1993 when it was published. Sophie, the protagonist, represents a Chicana woman's typical life as a mother. However, her story transgresses religious rules and racism. The second novel analyzed in this comparative study, The Monk, was part of an anti-Catholicism reaction at the end of the 18th century. Lewis was influenced by German Gothic literature and by English writer Anne Radcliffe, two aspects that can be found in The Monk as a characteristic of intertextuality. In the novel The Monk, Lewis portrays the desire of the characters to achieve perfection and purity through humorous and sometimes satirical tone. Ambrosio, the protagonist, is a famous and virtuous monk struggling against his sexual desires. Ultimately, he surrenders to temptation, which leads him down the path of sin and vice, incest, rape, and even murder. This comparative literary analysis draws on the following research questions. How do the archetypes of the shadow, the persona, and the animal illustrate Carl Jung's process of individuation in the main characters of Lewis, the Monk, and Castillo So Far From God? The second one, what are the similarities and differences between Lewis, the Monk, and Castillo So Far From God in terms of the process of individuation? And the last one, what is the full impact of the Catholic religion in the lives of the main characters in both novels? The Jungian theory of individuation is a main conceptual framework to expose the influence of religion in this analysis. Mayers and Pacheco clarified that Jung's theory of individuation is a psychological process of self-recognition, acceptance, and balance. The main terms used in the theory of individuation are related to the concept of myths. Remember that myths can be defined as symbolic projections of human hopes, fears, and values. Mayers and Pacheco also explained that the shadow is the dark part of the psyche, that undesirable, inferior, and less pleasant elements of the psyche. On the one hand, in The Monk, Lewis depicts the most sinister side of the unconscious, particularly in the case of Ambrosio, the protagonist. In other words, Lewis recurs to the Jungian archetype of the shadow to uncover the darkest part of Ambrosio's psyche, and his most undesirable qualities result in some sexual transgressions and crimes. For instance, Ambrosio begins by doubting his vow of celibacy. When considering his young age, he shows an incredible capacity to manipulate those around him, and he becomes an idyllic figure of the Spanish congregation. Lewis describes Ambrosio as a man of holiness, who was educated in the monastery where he remained ever since. Devotion and seriousness are two important traits in Ambrosio that are crucial to understanding his gradual descent into the darker side of the psyche. Throughout the monk, Ambrosio less than religious wishes are visible. Even when he prays in front of a painting of the Virgin Mary, Ambrosio reasons that it is not a woman's beauty that fills him with such enthusiasm, it is the divinity that he adores. Furthermore, when Rosario, whose original name is Matilda, reveals her true gender to a celibate monk, Ambrosio cannot further control his sexual desires. He also shows a sadistic aspect when he feels delighted at the same time when his friendship with Matilda is damaged. In these scenarios, Lewis openly exemplifies that even seemingly pure individuals possess a darker side. Similarly, in So Far From God, La Loca, translated as the Mad Woman, can be associated to the archetype of the shadow because of her dark desires and her lesser characteristics of the female psyche. In fact, these characters is never given a name and is only referred to as the Mad Woman. In Castillo's novel La Loca, the negative nickname connected to the shadow comes to exist given a series of events. For instance, when La Loca was 6 years old, an epileptic seizure causes her family to think she was dead. Suddenly, La Loca declares that she had flown to the roof of the church and that she was in hell and came back. La Loca thus characterizes an unexpected rebel as a synonymous to people's dark side because of her neurological condition, which at the time was associated with evil. Fe, La Loca's sister, reflects a dark side as well. She doesn't feel compassion for La Loca, but simply disappointment and disgust for her sister's obvious mental illness. The fact that La Loca retreats into herself and talks to animals and spirits instead of people simply reinforces her image, the outcast in her society. At the same time, her behavior reveals the darker side of the unconscious in this character. According to Mayer Pacheco, the archetypal persona is equal to social masks. The individual wears very different from his/her real self. Let's see. Ambrosio breaks his vows of chastity when he finally decides to unleash his pleasures. In this point, one exciting aspect of the novel is how Ambrosio falls prey to temptation when Rosario reveals her real gender. He is, in fact, a she, and he is deeply in love with Ambrosio. Hence, Ambrosio's social mask also becomes evident. In this context, the mask of virtue is a symbol that explains how Lewis introduces the archetype of persona. In truth, Lewis involves all characters through the archetype of the persona. All the characters live in the sacred places. Nevertheless, they are part of the evil situations, such as Matilda's magical rituals. In the case of So Far From God, some characters show this social mask more obvious. La Loca, for instance, uses a social mask, causing to hide her secret life because she has AIDS, and no one knows how she contracted it. The persona is then brought to light because of social stigma. Speranza, the eldest of Sophie's daughters, finishes college and during the process discovers her ethnicity. Through Speranza, Ana Castillo constructs an intellectual and rational woman as opposed to the more traditional religious women. As a result, her intellect also functions as a social mask to avoid recognition of Speranza's ethnic origin. Besides, Sophie's roles as a mother and wife correspond to the Jungian archetype of the persona, for such roles are influenced by men and women who cannot change their common perspective of women's roles, such as a mother. Hence, women need to wear social masks to navigate the world. This failure, in turn, uncovers another Jungian archetype, the anima. Meyers and Pacheco describe the anima as the contrasexual part of the psyche revealed in dreams or projections, life force, vital energy. Louis de Montt portrays the process of individuation, not only the persona but in the anima as well. Hence, the anima is the inner feminine side of a man. In terms of the anima, there are some Ambrosius characteristics that highlight the ambiguity of this aspect of his psyche. In the story, most people consider Ambrosio as a saint because he knows not in what consists the difference between man and woman. Such a premise implies that Ambrosio sees men and women similarly, without sexual differences, because he doesn't have any contact with women in his whole life. The psychological process of Ambrosio's self-recognition, acceptance, and balance bluntly illustrate the concept of the anima. In the case of Castillo's novel, like Louis, represents the process of individuation through the anima. Ana Castillo describes Caridad, Sophie's third daughter, as a sensual woman who has a sexuality active life with a cruel reality. She had 3 abortions. Caridad's marriage was unsuccessful, as were all her other relationships. This character reflects a woman hard by love, but who projects vital energy to overcome her pain. Thus, Caridad uses pain and sex to forget oppression that it's caused by religion, men, and her beliefs. Here, Castillo explores the use of a pain as a common element between the representation of the persona and the anima in Caridad's life, where she seeks freedom from social conventions. In this sense, the anima refers to the part of the psyche that these women can only find a different gender or that relates to men's conditions. Regarding the influence of religion through the process of individuation is obvious in both novels. In the case of So Far From God, one of the most critical aspects that affects women's power to make decisions is religion as a source of oppression. Because of the strict vision of religion, women must be passive and submissive. Such a perspective reflects a misogynistic vision of the woman. Ana Castillo shows the evil effects of religious rule using the only character that does not have a religious name, La Loca. On the other hand, Lewis uses Gothic fiction to inquire into the sinister nature of human beings, showing humanity's darkest desires. Lewis' novel becomes an instrument to express the psychology of terror and to close with a strong moral. Paradoxically, desire arises in religious people around the sacred place of the Church of the Capuchins, of whom the monk is the spiritual authority. In this novel, the Holy Church becomes the setting for various atrocities. Ambrosio, for example, rapes and kills Antonia, who was his sister, and at the end both Matilde and Ambrosio call Lucifer to save them from their depravities. In conclusion, The Monk and So Far From God are novels where both authors really on the Jungian archetypes of shadow, the persona, and the anima to illustrate the influence of religion and its effects on the characters' lives, such as failed process of individuation. Throughout The Monk, these 3 archetypes are found throughout Ambrosio's lives and through his relationship with Matilda Rosario. In the case of Castillo, she argues that the exploitation of women is mainly the result of 3 archetype roles: daughter, wife, and mother. Castillo describes that impact of religion on the women's power to make decisions, a form of domination. In the case of The Monk, the female figures are symbol of Ambrosio's temptation without empowerment to make any decision on their own. In the case in So Far From God, women have been taught to survive male oppression, including resist the mother's control, who lead them to favorable situations. In those cases, All female characters in So Far From God are empowered, whereas in The Monk, female characters remain oppressed.